These old machines, they appreciate patience, understanding how things really connect beneath the surface. He didn't have much patience, the one who fired me. 17 years building his company's core, dismissed as too expensive, legacy baggage, he called me. But legacy systems have deep memories, silent ledgers, and they forgot one crucial detail from the old days. I always kept secure backups. They thought they were cutting dead weight. They had no idea they'd just handed me the proof of their own carefully hidden crimes. There's a certain peace in understanding the flow, like tracing the current through these old circuits. Each connection matters. Each component has its purpose. You can't just slap things together and expect harmony. You need patience. You need to respect the design. People forget that these days, rushing for the next new thing without understanding the foundations. They see an old radio like this, maybe just junk destined for the landfill. But I see the ingenuity, the thought that went into making something built to last, something reliable. It requires a quiet focus, a dedication to getting it right, not just making it look right from the outside. It's a principle I've lived by, not just here in my little workshop sanctuary surrounded by the ghosts of technology past, but throughout my working life. That quiet dedication, the deep dive into how things truly function, it's often overlooked in a world that prizes noise and flash. Do you believe quiet strength is often underestimated? Share your thoughts below. It takes patience to truly see the patterns, to notice the subtle deviations from the norm, the things that whisper trouble long before they start shouting. And believe me, I learned the value of listening to those whispers during my 17 years building the digital heart of Novatech Solutions. Novatech, it wasn't always called that. When I started, it was Bayview Properties, just a couple of guys with big ideas and servers humming away in a repurposed closet. I was younger then, late 40s maybe, full of, well, not ambition in the way most people mean it, but a drive to build things correctly. Solid systems, reliable architecture. We grew fast, maybe too fast sometimes. Expansion across states, acquisitions, complexities multiplying year after year. And through it all, I was the constant, the guy who understood how every piece connected, because more often than not, I was the one who designed and laid the connections myself. From dial-up databases to integrated cloud solutions, though cloud wasn't the term back then, I architected it all. Tenant portals, automated maintenance requests, secure payment processing handling millions. It was intricate, a living system I knew like the back of my hand. There were late nights, frantic weekends spent coaxing life back into crashed servers, moments when the entire operation hinged on finding that one misplaced semicolon in thousands of lines of code. They relied on me, on the stability I provided, even if they didn't always grasp the complexity shielded from their view by the smooth user interface. I remember training batches of new hires, bright young minds eager to make their mark. I'd try to instill in them the importance of documentation, of understanding the why behind the what. Some got it, some just wanted to code the next feature. I was the solver of impossible problems, the retriever of lost data, the keeper of the institutional knowledge that walked the halls. Colleagues knew if something was truly broken, baffling everyone else, Arthur Jenkins could probably figure it out. It wasn't magic. It was just knowing the system, inside and out, because I'd lived and breathed it for nearly 2 decades. That kind of dedication builds loyalty, or so I thought. I turned down offers from competitors over the years, better titles, more money sometimes, but Novatech felt like mine. Not in ownership, of course, but in stewardship. I felt a responsibility to the systems, to the people who depended on them, working flawlessly every single day. The original owner, Harold Bay, understood that. He appreciated the quiet work, the stability that allowed his business ambitions to flourish. But things change. Harold retired, his son sold the company to a private equity firm, and suddenly, Novatech Solutions was born, complete with new logos and new management. That's when Richard Sterling arrived as Chief Technology Officer. Younger guy, sharp suit, MBA credentials, talked a lot about disruption, synergy, and optimizing workflows. He came from finance software, a world away from property management systems. He'd look at my carefully crafted architecture diagrams with a polite, vacant stare, more interested in the cost savings of off-the-shelf solutions than the bespoke efficiency I'd built over 17 years. He represented the new wave, focused on quarterly reports and the bottom line, seemingly incapable of appreciating the deep, reliable engine humming beneath the hood. Alongside him was Eleanor Vance, the Chief Financial Officer. She'd been there a bit longer, quiet, sharp, always focused intently on the numbers. Initially, I thought she might be an ally, someone who understood the value of reliable data flow. But she quickly aligned with Sterling's cost-cutting mantra. My proposals for a dedicated documentation team, crucial for long-term stability and knowledge transfer, were repeatedly denied. "Not in the budget, Art," she'd say, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. The focus was shifting, palpably, towards preparing the company for another potential sale, making the books look as lean as possible. I started noticing little things, being left out of planning meetings I previously would have led. Junior engineers, Sterling's hires, assigned tasks that touched critical infrastructure without fully consulting me. Then came the subtle flags in the system logs during my routine deep checks, financial transaction patterns that didn't quite fit, access overrides in modules Vance controlled. Nothing overt, just anomalies. Things only someone with my intimate historical knowledge of the custom code would likely spot. I documented them meticulously, logged them securely off-site, following protocols I'd set up years ago. Just diligence, I told myself, standard procedure. But a sense of unease settled in my gut, a low hum beneath the daily routine. Sterling's superficial questions, Vance's tight control over financial system access, the relentless pressure to cut costs, especially trimming experienced, expensive staff like me. It felt like pieces moving on a chessboard, preparing for a move I couldn't quite see yet. Looking back now, from the quiet clarity of this workshop, the signs were all there, blinking like warning lights on a server rack. The foundation I'd built was solid, but the ground above it was starting to shift, preparing to give way. The meeting was brutally short. Sterling delivered his lines. The HR rep slid the severance folder across the table, and just like that, 17 years evaporated into corporate jargon. Position eliminated. Redundancy. I remember nodding, picking up the folder, saying something neutral like, "I understand." What else was there to say? Arguing wouldn't change a decision clearly made weeks, maybe months before. Sterling seemed almost disappointed by my lack of protest, perhaps expecting a scene he could report back, paint me as difficult. But my mind wasn't on fighting a losing battle. It was already sifting through those anomalies I'd logged, the pieces clicking into a disturbing preliminary shape. Driving home that afternoon felt surreal, like being unplugged from a machine I'd spent half my life maintaining. The streets looked the same, the houses familiar, but I felt displaced, suddenly adrift. There was the practical shock, of course, the abrupt loss of income, the daunting prospect of finding a comparable role at my age in an industry increasingly obsessed with youth. I'd built Novatech systems to be resilient, but my own career suddenly felt incredibly fragile. That feeling, the cold weight of being deemed disposable after decades of dedicated service, that was the lowest point. Obsolete hardware, set aside for the scrap heap. Telling my wife, Martha, wasn't easy. She saw it on my face the moment I walked in, that forced calm I couldn't quite maintain. She was supportive, always has been, wrapping me in a hug, assuring me we'd figure it out. But I saw the worry flicker in her eyes too, the shared understanding of what this meant for our future, our plans. The injustice felt sharpest then, not just as a professional slight, but as a personal blow affecting the life we'd built together. That night's sleep was elusive. My mind kept replaying Sterling's words, Vance's notable absence, and those nagging inconsistencies in the financial system logs. The next morning, clarity began to cut through the fog of shock. Not anger, not yet, but a cold, analytical focus. I went down to my home office, bypassing the job search websites for now. Instead, I connected to my personal, secure off-site storage, the disaster recovery and full audit backup system I'd insisted on establishing years ago under Harold Bay. It was encrypted, stored independently, a complete mirror including system logs old management understood the value of. Current management, Sterling and Vance? They likely either didn't know it existed or dismissed it as another piece of legacy baggage. Pulling up the logs I'd flagged in the weeks before the firing, the picture sharpened dramatically. There it was. Apex Consulting, added as a vendor just 6 months prior. The authorization trace. Eleanor Vance's high-level credentials, time-stamped. The payment pattern started small, then escalated, always just below thresholds that might trigger extra scrutiny, paid against vague project codes. Then, cross-referencing access logs, I saw it. Specific overrides used in the custom financial modules I wrote, bypassing standard multi-level approvals. Only someone with deep financial admin rights and knowledge of those specific legacy backdoors could have done it. It wasn't just carelessness, it was deliberate. This wasn't about saving my salary. It was about silencing the one person who might stumble upon and actually understand the evidence of embezzlement woven into the very fabric of the systems I built. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't just fired me, they'd tried to cover their tracks by removing the only real witness. That's when the quiet resolve settled in. This wasn't just about my job anymore. It was about integrity, about the truth, about ensuring that Vance and likely Sterling, who must have benefited or looked the other way, didn't get away with betraying the company I helped build. My unique skills, the 17 years spent mastering that specific, often convoluted infrastructure, suddenly transformed from perceived liabilities into potent assets. I spent the next few days immersed in the data, tracing every digital thread. The vendor registration for Apex, filed hastily, minimal public information, a virtual office address. The payment timings correlated suspiciously with Vance approving large discretionary budget increases for Sterling's department, suggesting a quid pro quo or shared spoils. I analyzed the specific code routines Vance exploited, old administrative. Functions I'd argued years ago should be phased out but were kept for legacy compatibility. The arrogance of it was staggering. They assumed my knowledge was confined to the office servers, that firing me cut off my access to the truth. They underestimated my meticulous nature, my insistence on robust, independent backups. They underestimated me. They saw an aging tech guy, easily discarded. They failed to see the architect who held the original blueprints and knew precisely where the structural weaknesses and the hidden evidence lay. My path forward became clear. Direct confrontation was pointless. They'd deny, deflect, bury it deeper. I needed irrefutable proof, delivered strategically. The plan began to form, piece by careful piece. The dossier was key, not a rambling accusation, but a cold, hard presentation of the data. Time-stamped logs showing vendor creation and payment authorization by Vance, access records showing the override usage, cross-referenced financial data proving the inflated or fictitious nature of the payments, the suspicious correlation with Sterling's budget. all presented clearly, factually, letting the digital evidence speak for itself in a language auditors and diligent board members would understand implicitly. Timing would be everything. The leverage wasn't just past theft, it was the implication of ongoing systemic financial control failure. With Novatech actively courting buyers, revealing such a fundamental weakness during the critical due diligence phase would be catastrophic for Sterling and Vance. It would halt the sale, trigger intense scrutiny, and expose their actions in a way they couldn't escape. My strategy wasn't about fiery revenge. It was about using the system's own mechanisms, audits, board oversight, the pressure of a potential sale, to ensure precise, unavoidable accountability. The betrayal cut deep, but they had no idea what I was capable of. Keep watching. Revenge with Alex to see how the tables turned. Compiling the dossier became my sole focus for several days. It wasn't about crafting accusations. It was about letting the system's own records tell the story. I meticulously organized the data. Printouts of the damning log files with timestamps highlighted, clear charts showing the escalating payments to Apex Consulting, cross-referenced against non-existent project deliverables, screenshots of the administrative overrides Vance had used, anonymized but verifiable data points linking Apex back towards her sphere if anyone dug deep enough. Every piece of evidence was rooted in the digital bedrock I had laid years before. It had to be precise, undeniable, and speak the cold, hard language of auditors and seasoned board members. No emotion, just facts. Knowing I couldn't deliver, this myself without immediately becoming the focus of retaliation, I sought out legal counsel. Not a flashy firm, but a quiet, highly respected older lawyer known for his discretion and tenacity, recommended by a trusted former colleague from the Harold Bay era. I laid out the situation and the evidence, emphasizing my desire for anonymity and for the information to trigger a formal review process, not just a personal vendetta. He understood immediately. His role would be crucial, a sterile, professional conduit ensuring the information reached the right hands with the appropriate gravity, insulating me from immediate blowback. Together, we finalized the delivery plan. 2 identical packages containing the concise, fact-based dossier. One addressed directly to Mr. Harrison, the board member I knew from the old days, marked confidential and urgent, board member eyes only. The other, sent simultaneously via secure courier to the managing partner of the external auditing firm currently engaged in the pre-sale due diligence for Novatech. The timing was critical, sent precisely 1 week before the auditors were scheduled to present their preliminary findings to the board's audit committee. Enough time for the information to land, but not enough for Vance or Sterling to easily suppress it before the auditors connected the dots. Then, the waiting began. It was perhaps the hardest part. Having cast the stone, I could only watch for ripples from afar. I forced myself into a routine, working on my vintage electronics here in the workshop, spending time with Martha, trying to maintain an outward normalcy while internally, every nerve ending felt hyper-aware. I scanned business news daily, looking for any hint of turmoil at Novatech. There was nothing, initially. Just optimistic press releases about the potential sale, quotes from Sterling about the company's streamlined operations and bright future. Their arrogance, their belief they had successfully excised the problem, was almost palpable. Days turned into weeks. A sliver of doubt began to creep in. Had Harrison dismissed the package as disgruntled rambling? Had the auditors been pressured to ignore it? Was Vance more adept at covering her tracks than I'd anticipated? It's easy to second-guess when you're operating in the dark, relying on a plan set in motion weeks prior. I saw Sterling's picture accompanying a puff piece in a regional business journal, talking about leveraging new technologies. He looked confident, smug even. That image solidified my resolve. He and Vance represented the kind of corporate rot that valued appearances over substance, profit over integrity. They had to be stopped. Then, the first ripple. A carefully worded email from Sarah, a database administrator I'd mentored years ago and occasionally kept in touch with. Nothing direct, she was too smart for that. Just a casual mention of things being unexpectedly hectic. Auditors suddenly asking for very specific legacy transaction reports, and a lot of closed-door meetings up on the executive floor. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The dossier had landed. The questions were being asked. The quiet disruption I'd initiated was beginning to reverberate within Novatech's walls. The news brought a wave of quiet tension, a nervous energy that hummed beneath my calm exterior. My plan, built on logic and system knowledge, was working as designed. The auditors, armed with specific pointers, were undoubtedly finding the anomalies. Harrison, a man of integrity, wouldn't let it rest. Yet knowing the plan was unfolding didn't bring relief. Not yet. It brought the heightened awareness of a critical phase in progress, the feeling of pieces moving irrevocably towards confrontation. I stayed patient, trusting the process I'd set in motion, trusting the evidence. The beauty of the strategy, if I can call it that, was using their own ambition against them. The impending sale was their endgame, the prize they likely orchestrated my removal to secure. By injecting irrefutable evidence of financial impropriety during the crucial due diligence phase, I hadn't just exposed past wrongdoing. I'd placed a landmine directly in the path of their future aspirations. They couldn't suppress the investigation without jeopardizing the sale, and they couldn't allow the sale to proceed with the investigation revealing their fraud. If you enjoy seeing clever strategy overcome injustice, make sure you subscribe to Revenge with Alex. I doubled down on my workshop projects, focusing my restless energy on the precise, logical work of restoration. It was a way to manage the waiting, to channel the anticipation. I meticulously cleaned contacts, replaced worn capacitors, traced faint signals, mirroring the process I'd applied to Novatech's data. Both required patience, attention to detail, and an understanding that true function often lies hidden beneath the surface. My lawyer had advised complete radio silence, unless contacted, so I simply waited, trusting the seeds I'd planted were taking root in fertile ground. Finally, almost 3 weeks after the packages were sent, the call came. Not from Novatech, but from my lawyer. His voice was calm, professional. "Arthur," he began, "I received confirmation through back channels. Mr. Harrison presented your information to the audit committee. The external auditors corroborated the core findings independently. A formal high-level internal investigation is underway. The potential buyers have been notified, and the sale discussions are officially suspended pending the outcome." He paused. "Reports indicate Ms. Vance and Mr. Sterling are under significant internal scrutiny." The checkmate was in sight. The silent ledger was finally being read aloud. The weeks following that call from my lawyer were a strange mix of quiet vindication and detached observation. I wasn't inside Novatech anymore, didn't have access to the internal rumor mill, but news, eventually, trickled out through industry contacts and, more dramatically, through public filings and restrained press releases. The internal investigation, spearheaded by the board's audit committee and fortified by the external auditors armed with my roadmap, moved swiftly. Confronted with time-stamped system logs, undeniable transaction trails, and evidence of circumvented controls, Eleanor Vance's defense crumbled. There was no explaining away the digital footprints leading directly back to her credentials and the fictitious Apex Consulting. The climax, as I pieced it together, wasn't one explosive meeting, but a series of them. The auditors presented their findings, confirming the embezzlement scheme and quantifying the significant sums diverted over 18 months. They highlighted the critical failures in internal controls, pointing fingers implicitly and then likely explicitly at both Vance for the act and Sterling for either complicity or gross negligence as the CTO responsible for system integrity and oversight. The board, facing a collapsed sale negotiation and potential legal exposure, had no choice but to act decisively. My dossier, delivered anonymously, had forced their hand, leveraging their own self-interest to ensure accountability. The consequences were precisely what the evidence dictated. Eleanor Vance was terminated immediately. News followed later of criminal charges being filed for embezzlement and wire fraud. Her carefully constructed career vanished overnight. Richard Sterling was also fired, officially for failure to maintain adequate financial controls and gross negligence, though the whispers of potential kickbacks likely sealed his fate. His meteoric rise ended in a spectacular crash, his reputation in the industry shredded. The very legacy baggage he'd sought to discard had, ironically, contained the proof of his own downfall. Justice, in this case, wasn't loud or confrontational. It was delivered via forensic accounting reports and board resolutions. As for Novatech itself, the damage was significant. The failed sale, the revealed financial instability, and the executive scandal tarnished its reputation. Several key clients reportedly reviewed their contracts. The 3 junior guys Sterling had boasted about couldn't possibly manage the complex systems, especially amidst the internal chaos and the sudden departure of senior leadership. While I felt no joy in the company's struggles, I had built too much of it for that. There was a certain grim affirmation in seeing the real-world cost of devaluing experience and enabling unethical shortcuts. They had tried to save money by cutting my salary. They ended up losing millions and crippling the company's future. My own path unfolded quietly. The sense of vindication wasn't celebratory, but a deep, quiet settling. It was the feeling of a complex equation finally balancing, of integrity being affirmed. Mr. Harrison did reach out, a brief, discreet call. He never acknowledged the dossier directly, but thanked me for my 17 years of service and expressed regret at how things had ended, wishing me well. It was as close to an apology or acknowledgement as I expected or needed. The quiet satisfaction came from knowing that my skills, my meticulous nature, the very qualities they dismissed, were instrumental in bringing the truth to light. I didn't return to corporate life immediately. Instead, I took some time, focusing on my workshop, rediscovering the simple satisfaction of hands-on work. Eventually, I did some high-level consulting, specializing in system audits and designing robust internal controls for companies that genuinely valued experience. Lessons learned, perhaps, from Novatech's cautionary tale. My reputation, ironically, enhanced by the Novatech debacle among those who knew the real story, allowed me to choose projects where my principles aligned with the clients. It was a far more fulfilling way to work. So now, years later, I sit here, surrounded by the elegant logic of old machines. The drama of Novatech feels like another lifetime, viewed through the lens of accumulated experience. Sterling and Vance faded into obscurity, footnotes in a corporate scandal. Novatech was eventually sold, piecemeal, for a fraction of its former value. But the core lesson endures. True value isn't always on the balance sheet or in the latest buzzwords. It's in the solid foundations, the reliable systems, the integrity of the people who build and maintain them. Did this story of long-game justice resonate with you? Hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to see it. They thought they could simply erase 17 years of institutional knowledge, 17 years of dedication, by signing a termination letter. They underestimated the quiet man in the corner office, the one who understood the system down to its bones. They underestimated the power of meticulously kept records, the silent witnesses that don't forget. They failed to understand that sometimes the most effective response isn't loud protest, but the quiet, patient execution of a plan rooted in truth and competence. That vintage radio I was working on? It plays perfectly now, clear as a bell, order restored. Looking back, I wouldn't call it revenge. Revenge feels hot, impulsive. This was different. It was about balance. It was about ensuring that the careful, dedicated work wasn't trampled by reckless ambition and deceit. It was about the silent ledger, the one that records everything, eventually demanding to be balanced. And in the quiet hum of this workshop, surrounded by systems built with care, I find a profound sense of peace, knowing that, in my own small way, I helped ensure that balance was finally achieved. Love this story? Tell us what city you're watching Revenge with Alex from in the